morning, panel. First of all, I would like to start off with my rebuttals. The first speaker came here and she framed co-governance as giving affected communities a real seat in the decision-making process. She also talked about the stakeholders being farmers, workers, and community members. But my issue with this isn't that they're part of the conversation. My issue with this is that it's hard to come to a fruitful conclusion when farmers probably want land, workers probably want employment opportunities, and community members just want development in their communities. So if all three stakeholders have different needs or different wants from this situation, then how could they possibly come to a consensus? Because remember, all of them are living in the same community. It's hard to come to a consensus to find one thing in common when you all have different needs. Okay. I'll move on. She also talked about the TCB model and the community members and community council who will be involved in decision-making process. But my question that I posed to them is who chooses these community council? Because last time I checked, community council members were usually government members. And if we're referring to the status quo, government members are usually corrupt, meaning that if community council members are part of the government, that means that they are vulnerable to corruption, meaning that they will, at the end of the day, not be making decisions that are fruitful for said affected community. She also talked about unequal distribution of wealth, which I think exists in a larger scope in their world than it does in ours, because in their world, they're only focusing on those affected communities and them generating a profit for those affected communities, which isn't a bad thing, but we're focusing on generating a profit and development for not only affected communities, but also the rest of the nation. They also talked about how compensation is optional, but I would like to rebut this by saying that courts can review compensation, and also lenders, private investors, like the World Bank, can withhold funding if standards are violated. For example, it's part of the World Bank's environmental and social standards. It's the fifth one. For example, in Ethiopia and Tanzania, watchdogs went and reported that standards were not being met during their resettlement project, and this caused the funding to be withheld until the standards were improved. So, yeah. Also, they talked about how the community will share the project benefits with the nation. But I completely disagree with this because the communities are in favor of what's best for them. Remember that these people are in a vulnerable position, therefore they won't be thinking about how to develop the nation because the nation might be poor, but they are poorer, okay? So that means that they'll be focusing on how to get to poor. Okay, what I'm trying to say is that the affected communities are in a worse condition than the nation. So their last concern would be developing the nation, will be developing themselves. Okay. I loved when the second speaker came here and talked about the private-public cooperation. But I would like to clarify that there's a difference between cooperation and co-governance. Just because the government told you what they were going to do in your affected community, and just because they worked with you to do that, doesn't mean that you had equal decision-making authority or you had an equal say in the conversation. Now, I have rebutted a lot, so now I would like to get into what is it exactly that we as side negative stand for. We do not stand for the status quo, which side proposition keeps throwing in our mouths. Rather, what we stand for is improving the status quo using things such as environmental impact assessments and cooperation and communication with those affected communities. We do not want to introduce a completely new model which has proven to fail in areas such as Sierra Leone, where the affected communities were involved in the mining project and they were given an equal seat at the table, and they were unable to come to a consensus. Why? Because each of them had different views of how they wanted to go about this mining project, and it ended up resulting in gun violence, something that side affirmative argues does not exist. They argue that conflict does not exist in their world, but that's impossible when people have so many different needs. Okay, so I've already told you that we're fighting for status quo. But I also have more arguments as to why we believe that you do not need formal co-governance to protect these communities. The first reason why we believe that the government should be the primary decision maker is because governments are accountable to the entire nation, but communities are only accountable to themselves. This is a social justice debate, and while we're looking at social justice, we should also look at the scope of how this justice is being achieved. The government being the primary decision maker, and there being reforms in the government with these environmental impact assessment and inclusion conversations, means that not only is the entire nation benefiting from the projects that are being carried out in these affected communities, but also the affected communities are being properly catered for. For example, in Uganda, during the oil development project in the Albertine region, some people were offered cash to relocate, while others were offered resettlement programs, which means that when the government has the people in mind, they are able to make decisions that are good for the general nation and not just for one specific area, so the scope is bigger. Let me give you this analogy. Let's say we have parents and we have a child. So in this conversation, what side negative is arguing for is that the government and the private sector are the parents, and the affected communities are the child. So when parents are making a decision for the child, they don't parentify the child and give them the same level of authority. What they do instead is make decisions that they see fit for that child in accordance to their needs and their wants. So what we want to do is, instead of parentifying the child, which is these affected communities, we want to reform the parents and make them better parents for their children. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Can you get a minute?
Someone left their money here.
Okay. So my first question will be, isn't the government's job to secure that everyone's interests are considered? It is. So, how's that any different from our model, which does provide a legal framework and justice through the power of voice and form?
Because in your model, there's too much veto power given to these affected communities. If there's a dam project that can be constructed and it's safe for the communities, and they'll be offered compensation if resettlement needs to take place, that means that the dam and that community says no to the dam project, that means the dam project won't take place. Therefore, you're only supplying justice to the affected community and not to the general nation. The scope, okay.
So, having said that, do you have any examples of any developmental project having brought significant negative impacts to the affected community, the community being recompensated fully to satisfaction?
I do actually. I just talked
Could you
about,
present them with source?
yeah, I could. So I just talked about the Uganda oil development project in the Albertine region. So what happened here is some people were offered cash compensation while other people were recompensated using housing and resettlement program. Okay? And there's also, you asked me for my source. Okay.
If your model is just trying to improve the status quo model, then you don't have actual examples of said model, hence it's superficial.
I don't think that's true, because my first speaker brought up the argument of South Africa and how they are the best African country to look at when it comes to implementation of environmental impact assessment. That's why they're number one in the environmental scale in Africa.
But why do we receive poor cases of there being a lack of efficient community consent from the people?
Is that received in South Africa?
Yes.
Okay, that's
So that is a answer on your side.
okay.
So
But
next
you're
question,
not-
do you agree that the government being corrupted, there will still be inevitably corruption as you have not provided accountability for it?
Okay, I'm glad you brought up the issue of accountability, because in our world, accountability does exist. Because as my first speaker talked about, there was this public, was it public involvement? public cooperation that is a part of environmental impact assessment. So what happens is before any projects are taking place, the government first has to consult the people. And if the people do not agree with the project, then they have to find a way to either compensate them or find another project which is similar that won't affect them to the same way. So accountability does exist in our world because these court cases do exist. You just said status quo has court cases. And court cases existing status quo, that means the government is being held accountable by legal authorities.
Do you think it's better to prevent all that from happening or just mitigating the challenges along the way?
I think it's better to, I think that that question is a bit contradictory because I'm not going to answer that because you think it's going to support your case. I don't think that you guys are mitigating challenges. I think that you're increasing them by bringing in more people in the conversation. There's too much veto power. There's too much power to say no.
Moving on. Does your alternative model give communities the legal right to say no to a project that would destroy their water source?
Yes, it does. No? And matter of fact, it's not only the community's job. It's not the community's job to say no. These environmental impact assessments hold the government accountable. If the project is too disastrous for it to take place in the community, then it's discontinued. This has happened so many times, especially in developed countries.
Could you set an example for that?
I could. Not at the moment, but my third speaker will.
Okay, then I'm...
Okay, so my speech will begin in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. As the third speaker, first of all, I'll answer the question posed by the second speaker of the negative side to our side. She asked on who chooses this community concept that we propose. But I believe my first speaker, when presenting this model that we propose, the TCEB model, she clearly said that this community concept, the representatives will be chosen by the community, the people of the community, and the leaders will be chosen as how formal voting processes are. The majority vote gets the win, and the leaders are chosen. And I'll go on with my rebuttals. She came here and said that, kept on saying that no consensus is reached, no fruitful decision is made because everyone has different views and everything. But what we are advocating on our side of co-governance is that we are including communities legally. We are legally binding them to the project. So it is possible that a decision is made that maybe some of the community members are against it, but our goal here isn't to make everyone happy, but to make everyone content with the decision. Why content? Because they are legally binded to the project. Although it might have not gone with their expectations, but they are content that they'll benefit from the project. They are content that these projects will give benefits to them because they are already legally binded to the project. And that is what we're advocating for as side affirmative. Also, she came here and kept on talking that we are focusing on the community, we're listening to them. When they say no, then we don't take the and then we don't implement the project. And even their side kept on saying, do you think maybe if the Ethiopian dam will be built with co-governance? But they failed to understand what what my previous speakers kept on saying with our model, is that we never say that we'll focus on communities as per se alone and neglect the development that the state wants to bring. No, what we are saying is that, and even my previous speakers brought out the issue of NGOs, which will be there to educate these communities on the projects, to raise awareness on them, and with this legally binding contracts and the decisions, the legal decision-making process that involves all three parties, then that will decide what, if the project goes on or not, and not just what the community says. Because what just the community says isn't the end of our decision-making process on our side. There'll be NGOs that educate them. There'll be different strategies that were clearly stated by the speakers on my previous speakers on our side that will ensure that if the project is to be altered, then it is because of meaningful reasons and meaningful decisions. Also, their side kept on talking about how, especially the second speaker, kept on talking about how public-private cooperation is not the same as co-governance. We didn't say that it's the same as co-governance. We said that public-private cooperation is part of our model. And if it was successful in Ghana, then if we introduce it in our model and make it more and make it a more legal decision-making process, then it will be even more successful. And also, we as side affirmative showed you how we'll address the challenges that might raise from the negative side. The issue of delays. We told you about the time frame of making decisions. The issue of conflicts. We told you about the representatives that will be chosen and the legal decision-making process, and how actually co-governance prevents the after conflicts that could occur because the state or the government implemented a project without legally incorporating the community. Also, we as side affirmative gave gave examples of projects that didn't succeed because through their model that they said that they will improve, but they didn't show how they didn't engage with our examples and how those challenges that maybe was the reason for the examples that we gave to fail, how will they be mitigated on their side. And also, they focused on environmental impact assessment, but they didn't show us how will they address displacement of people, of communities. How will they kept on talking about compensation, but we show you that with our model, it's not that we're against the compensation, because if the project is implemented and we know that maybe some people of the community will be affected, then they'll be compensated. But our model is more just because from the decision-making process, we've included them as legal partners because they are directly affected by the models. The second speaker also came here, of my side, came here and talked about the better long-term outcomes and the prevention of extraction colonialism. We have showed you that extraction colonialism will be prevented And we'll be assured of this. Why? Because communities have already been legally binded to the project. So we are assured that they'll benefit from the project. And the outcomes will be long-term. Why? Because after the decision is made, if the project is implemented, then the community's members are content because they were given awareness, they were given education, they know why the project was made. And if it wasn't, then it was for the better good. The harms exceeded the benefits. And I'd like to raise my case. Thank you.
I'll be starting in 3, 2, 1. Good morning, everyone. In my speech, you're going to get 4 things. Number 1, rebuttals. Number 2, what we offer from side negative. Number 3, the clashes that have existed throughout this entire debate. But number 4, how we think we achieve the overall better social justice from side negative than what affirmative side could ever dream of. Okay, so let us start with the rebuttals that we have. Okay, so from side negative, the basis of the entire case is that they believe communities need to be involved, have to be on the same table, they have to be part of the decision making throughout the duration of the project. Okay, we have told them how difficult that is to achieve, especially when it comes to the model they proposed, which is through voting. When they vote, they are going to encounter a lack of consensus. There will be a section of community that is not going to be happy with those decisions, and what will happen, there will be major split. This will result in 2 things. Number 1, the officials who are dealing with trying to push for that project will either try to manipulate the communities and buy their way into executing that project. But even if that was not enough, number 2, there will be protests from this unsatisfied section of community because their necessities have not been taken into consideration. They will protest, they will add into conflicts, and investors don't want to be at a place where there are conflicts. Like it has happened in Zambia in 1970 when the government tried to impose the co-governance model by inviting the communities affected into the table to be part of the equal decision making, but it failed terribly. And this is going to lead into investors going away because they don't want to be in a place where people protest every now and then to just get their shared consensus, which is really hard from what you have just told you from our side. And there will be violence, and if that was enough, there will be time delays because these protests and conflicts from the communities that are not happy due to the mode of voting that has been done are going to do. So you are more likely going to end up with that project not being implemented Even so, you are more likely going to end up with zero justice, not only for the affected communities, but for the entire nation as large. Because we are talking about bigger projects here. We're talking about projects that can bring a lot of taxes to the government, can bring a lot of compensations to these communities. By the sheer say from the community through these conflicts and time delays, we are not going to achieve that sort of justice. Okay? So what do we from side negative give you? Okay? We believe that it is way easier to improve the status quo than to try to implement an entire new system, just as what the affirmative side is trying to do. We tell you we are going to consult the community before the project even takes place. What this will do is it will not make them part of the decision making. This will give them justice, recognition justice, number one, because we are sure they have their concerns. We are sure somebody has a land somewhere where we need to pass the road. We are sure somebody has a farm somewhere, but we're going to tell them the benefits that are going to occur through the implementation of this project are way bigger, way like in a very bigger scale compared to the land of they will try to restrict that road to pass. Okay, it has happened in China, where our first speaker said that the dam that was constructed to give this sort of power from hydroelectric power, how it transitioned China from a very poor country to a very developed country. And we here, and to be like a very global superpower. We tell you from side negative, what has worked in developed countries can be a blueprint for developing countries in Africa, because there is no any difference except geographical. But if the negative side, if the affirmative side are trying to push this back, let us give you another example where in 1970, the Egypt government implemented this sort of mega dam project to power the country through electricity. What that led to was a lot of surplus in terms of energy requirement, and Egypt is at a far better place than it was all those years ago. And this answered the concerns also that the side affirmative brought before us, which are displacement. Okay, in our world, we compensate those people who have been displaced through giving them better access to even better areas and even better justice. So we achieve justice in so many ways, but if that was not enough, let me go into how we achieve this justice specifically from side negative. Okay, so we think we bring recognition justice because we consult the community right at the very beginning of the project, not as decision makers, but we just want to acknowledge what their needs are and that we are going to take care into the consideration, like into our decision makings. That will eradicate the time delay that will happen if the consensus model is trying to be achieved through side affirmative. We bring developmental justice at a scope that is way bigger than what they can provide, because we care for the entire nation, but not only for the localized community. Proud to oppose.
Great. Thank you so much, affirmative. Thank you so much, negative, for a great debate. Please cross over, shake hands, and yeah, back to Isabel.
I like to experience a lot to get to that. Where are we supposed to go? No, lakini wanatangaza general